Right, so Super Slam is out and about and it brings with it some fun new card interactions. So I thought, why don't we check out a few of my favorites? And as always, if you are enjoying the content, feel free to give it a like and subscribe. The buttons are right down there, along with a code to Into the AM for 10% off at checkout. If you ever feel like showing me a little bit more support and picking yourself up something in the process. But with that said, let's get into the content. So, for our Reviled cards and interactions, we're starting off with Outside Interference. And to me, this card is basically the pinnacle of flexibility, right? It is a blue in deck that can become whatever we need it to be. Even its downside of having 0 block is irrelevant, right? Because it's instant discard, reveal a Reviled attack action from your inventory, and then put it into your hand. So you can convert this into whatever card you need whenever you need it. So if you have to block out, you can still convert this to a 3-block card, and again, get around its main downside, right? So other than that, it's a blue that's red, essentially. It's a discard that turns on our Mandible Claw. There is just a lot to love with this card. So in terms of what we can actually do with it, again, we can use its ability to discard it. And in my current inventory, we have a few different options. We have Big Bully, Bully Tactics, Mocking Blow, and the Old Switcheroo. So all of these are pretty conditional cards, meaning that, again, having them in our deck can lead to some level of inconsistencies. So by having them just be picks for outside interference, we can trim down the number of copies in our deck, but still have them accessible if we have achieved the certain conditions to be able to use them to their full effect. So for instance, Big Bully and Mocking Blow both require us to be higher than our opponent's life in order to trigger their boo, and then they require a boo for their additional effect. So again, there may be cards we only want when we're meeting that condition. As for Big Bully, it could close out a game for us, right? Having its Intimidate and allowing us to chip away the last of our opponent's life. And then a card like the Old Switcheroo is still at least a blue 3-block if we need a 3-block, or to some degree some situational use if we need to use it for its clash interactions. But for the showcase, we'll pick the good old Big Bully, right? The nice, big, powerful card as Kayo. And again, we're able to Mandible Claw to start off, although if we do, in the case of Big Bully, we won't be able to use Kayo with it. So again, rationale for choosing one of the other attacks, especially because we won't actually get the boo trigger since we're against the bot and the bot has, well, maxed out HP. But the idea here is, again, that it sets up a really powerful turn, be it the current turn that you're on, or by arsenaling the card you pick and still being able to send Mandible Claw and something else. Not to mention, then we have Visit the Boneyard as well as a way to fetch another outside interference because it is a 6-power card. So even though we do have other big cards like Show of Strength, Swing Big, all the good Powerhouse Brute cards, we can still fetch ourselves another outside interference, which at the very least then is a blue on top of our deck that we know we will have access to, along with creating a Vigor through Visit the Boneyard, or we can fetch something big. So yeah, overall it's just the amount of flexibility this card offers, and then the other interactions with it that are really, really solid. And overall, to me, the simplest way to think about it is a red that pitches as a blue. Now, speaking about flexibility and tricking our opponent, we have Arrogant Showboating. So it's probably one boo trigger away from being an utterly disgusting card, but it's still fun, it's still something to strive for, and that's what I do very much enjoy. So Arrogant Showboating, create a might token for each defending card. So the idea there being, as Kayo, we bait our opponent into blocking because we have the ability to convert a card like, in this case, Bad, Beaten, and Broken to a 6-power, and maybe a little bit more if we trigger its effect. We can then punish our opponent by using Arrogant Showboating and essentially pushing our resources to the next turn, rather than, again, doubling down on a turn that's already been maybe overblocked. So in this scenario, right, we send Battered, Beaten, and Broken, and again, on the surface, it's just a 1, but we're KO, right? So we can, at the very least, make it a 6. So in our opponent's case, well, they want to block, say, 6. Now, lucky for me, this Ira does not have enough, right? So they have to actually give 3 cards if they do actually want to block it out, right? So 7's coming in, and then as KO, we get to Arrogant Showboating, which gets us our 3, and pushes Bad, Beaten, Broken to a 4 because it's now triggered its effect, which means from there, we can, of course, as KO, pump it even higher, right? So we end up having it come in 4-9 over the top of their blocks, while also then generating 3 might for our next turn. But the flexibility is also the different ways we could have played the turn. So we also had Concealed Object. Again, Arrogant Showboating is generating some tokens, right? But say our opponent did block 6. They only blocked with 2 cards. And we could still play Arrogant Showboating along with our Concealed Object to get a Vigor and 2 might, and then still arsenal a card rather than doubling down on just pumping battered, beaten, and broken. But if we're talking about might generation, we can't leave out Fix the Match and Overturn the Result. So Fix the Match allows us to search our deck for a card and put it on top, right? And then every time it's blocked, we clash with our opponent, making use of the card we just put at the top of our deck. So then in comes Overturn the Result, which is whenever we lose a clash, we actually win it, and we get a boo trigger. So between Overturn the Results and Fix the Match, as Kayo, we get to create a Might and a Vigor, and then for Lyath, we'd be creating 2 Might tokens apiece, making them quite the dynamic duo. Not to mention then Overturn the Results is still at the very least a blue 3-block in deck. So you could probably take 1, 2 copies of Overturn, and then a few copies of Fix the Match to just pull this type of combo off. So if we send Fix the Match, again, we get to put a card on top of our deck, so Overturn the Results, and then as Kayo, we still have the possibility to push this to a 6, right? So our opponent probably wants to block 6. So in comes 2 cards as the KO, right? And then for us, that forces 2 clashes, meaning that we get ourselves 2 Might and 2 Vigor for our next turn. And then, of course, if they don't overblock it, we could have still KO'd and made it into a nice juicy 6 and maybe gone some chip damage across. And then in terms of chip damage, we also have access as brute to another card called Unexpected Backhand, which has a little bit of clash interaction. So when you win a clash revealing this card, you get to deal 1 damage to your opponent. So essentially what we can do with Fix the Match is create a situation where if we think we're going to lose the clashes, then we can find Overturn the Results. But if we have a chance of winning, we can find something like Unexpected Backhand. So in this scenario, we play Fix the Match, and again, we get to search for a card, and that card, again, can either be Unexpected Backhand, Overturn the Result, maybe a blue Unexpected Backhand, right? So we have a few different choices. So in this scenario, because we want to show off Unexpected Backhand, we'll go with Unexpected Backhand, but we do have the red in hand if we want something a bit bigger. Gets a little bit more awkward in the deck, though, since it's a 3-cost red, and again, we want blues to feed into Kayo's ability, or, 2-cost big attacks as brutes, right? There's a lot better attacks that we could take to just be a little bit easier to swing with, but we'll go with the blue Unexpected Backhand. So what this means is if our opponent blocks, again, 6, right? So 2 cards. So in this case, they block with 2, that's 6 block overall to play around our ability, then that is 2 clashes. So from the 2 clashes means we will end up dealing that chip damage to our opponent, and we don't actually have to go with Kayo's ability. So in this scenario, we clash, so Fix the Match reveals Unexpected Backhand and Bittering Thorns, and we can do that again, and that will result in our opponent taking 2 licks of a chip damage. From there, what we can actually do is, as Kayo, since I have Snapdragon Scalers, is we can follow it up with our Reckless Stampede. Since we won both clashes, we know that we can double down with the effect. And again, this is one of those nicer 2-cost reds, right? So it's a 7, but then also has a pretty strong effect in itself that can deal some chip damage. So by giving Fix the Match go again, that leaves us the opportunity to attack with another attack. So in this case, we will end up playing Reckless Stampede, and again, forcing our opponent to either block or clash, right? So either way, they're going to take chip damage. So in this scenario, right, they'd have to block 7, but if they block 7, that's probably 3 cards. If they block with 3 cards, that's 3 clashes, and 3 clashes would result in possibly 6 damage. So it's a little bit of a interesting decision point for your opponent in how much is the correct block, right? How much damage to take from Reckless Stampede versus trying to get away with the block, especially, again, following Fix the Match, where we've both seen what cards have been revealed, so we know generally how the clash outcome is actually going to go. But we'll go with the opponent fully blocking out the attack, right? So 2 cards from hand to block for 6, and then we'll just chuck on one of the equipment pieces, right? Just to exemplify how much damage we can deal just off of the clash effects alone. So then we go through all the clashes, and each clash is going to be dealing 2 damage, 1 from our Unexpected Backhand, and then 1 from Reckless Stampede itself. So let me skip through them. 8 damage overall from that turn, right? So 2 clashes from Fix the Match, and then another 6 damage from Reckless Stampede. So that is quite a useful little bit of chip damage that again gives us some flexibility in what we choose through Fix the Match. Again, nice and easily, find Overturn the Results, win the clash, we get something big, or maybe take a blue Unexpected Backhand, since it's still blue in the deck, and use that against some of those smaller, wider decks where you have a greater chance of winning at a 5 power basis. But when it comes to clashing for tokens, what if we lose? Well, that's a whole other aspect of Reviled. So we have the card Steal Victory, which is a nice blue 3-block, right? So it gets around confidence, overpower, but then it also has the added effect of stealing a token from our opponent. So in this scenario, we can use it in conjunction with another card, Vigorous Smash Up, as our opponent, right? They send a nice big attack. like a Bare Fangs, and that's coming in for 7. So what we can do is block with both our Vigorous Smash Up and our Steal Victory, forcing a clash, but then also giving us the opportunity to steal the token back. So we can go to resolve the effects and make sure that our Vigorous Smash Up triggers first, followed by our Steal Victory. That way we have the option to steal the token back if we do lose the clash, which I would assume we will, since, it's Kayo armed and dangerous. So we hit our blue Vigorous Smash Up, and they hit a nice big red, so doesn't matter if we sink or not, which is also still a nice utility of Vigorous Smash Up. But now we get the opportunity to steal the token, so in this case, we can steal either the might they generated themselves, or the vigor, and the vigor is probably a little bit more important. Not only does Steal Victory have some really good utility against certain heroes, it also has some synergies within your own deck as a safety against some of your other effects going a little bit wrong. Right, so we've shown Kayo a fair bit of love, but what about Lyath? Well, hear me out. Tectonic plating. So yeah, Tunic and getting a resource every 3 turns is probably still a lot more nice, but the interactions, right? Tectonic plating allows us to create a seismic surge token at the cost of a resource, and then that token goes, somewhat of a way to clearing some of our other effects like the goon cards, right? The goon cards check if we control 3 or more auras. Now that can also be accomplished through our auras of suspense, through booing. But again, in terms of consistency, never a bad thing to have in the back of our hand. So currently, with the hand we have Concealed Object, that gets us 1 Might token, so that's 1 aura. Villainous Pose, that'd be another. And, well, Tectonic Plating, so we can get to our 3, feeding 1 resource into our next turn, and opening up some really good Guardian options like Thump, right? If this has greater than its base, it gets Dominate, and if it deals any damage, it forces our opponent to discard a card. Not to mention, Overcrowded also becoming a little bit better of a block as well, because now we have access to 2 different tokens on queue, right? We have Seismic Surge through Tectonic Plating, and Might through Lyath. But again, with our current hand, we can go Tectonic Plating, we'll pitch the Thump, this will in turn get us a Seismic Surge token, we can then throw out our Concealed Object, get 1 Might off of that, we have 2 resources floating, so in comes Villainous Pose for another Might token, and then we have our 3 for our Goon Beatdown, while also conserving our last card to, of course, Arsenal. So, Goon Beatdown comes in as a nice 8, which then we can bump to a 9 with our Concealed Object, after which we're able to stick our Overcrowded into our arsenal, since it also has Ambush, right? So it is a nice blue block that we can use from our arsenal that is now worth 3 block after Lyath's ability. So, on our next turn, what we're able to do is Arsenal our Overcrowded, we get ourselves our Thump and our Booze, and of course, again, we can use Overcrowded as a 3 block. Once its effect triggers, right, it'll get +1 from Seismic Surge and 1 for Might. We tack on our Rampart of the Ram's Head. If we hadn't generated any Might on our turn, we'd be able to Lyath for Might. Not to mention then, if this was a proper deck, right, we'd still have some extra cards in hand as well. But from this, we get a decent amount of block out of our Overcrowded, and then we're able to throw out our Thump. That is now being discounted from our Seismic Surge, right? Because we've stockpiled the resource. So we only need 1 blue to actually play it, and then it gets buffed from the Might, making it a 5 Dominate that on hit discards. And again, could be red, it could be yellow. Overall, it could be worked into the deck, along with the Goon cards a bit more consistently, through a card like Tectonic Plating. Now, speaking of Overcrowded, how much block can we comfortably get it to? Well, as Lyath, right, Reviled Guardian, we have access to Might the easiest, followed by Seismic Surge and a little bit of Vigor. So, Overcrowded gains +1, either power or block, depending on how you're using it, for each different aura token currently in the arena. So, for instance, if we're able to get a Might, Vigor, and a Seismic Surge on board as Lyath, we now have a card that we can play from our arsenal, right, because it has the keyword Ambush, and would be currently blocking for 4. But we can push it a little bit higher through a card like Civic Steps that allows us to create another token. So if we use Civic Steps in conjunction with our Overcrowded, and then control the order in which they resolve, so that Civic Steps occurs first, then we force our opponent to generate a Quicken, and Overcrowded becomes a nice hefty 5 block, because remember, Civic Steps as well is halved through Lyath's ability. But what about as Kayo? Well, similarly, he has access routinely to about 3 tokens, being Might, Vigor through his hero ability, and then also Agility, being a brute-ish mechanic. But you also do have the applicability to give your opponent Quicken through a card like, say, Swing Big. But overall, Ambush is still then a nice, powerful card that you can block with from Arsenal, not to mention it just being a blue card in your deck regardless, right? So in this scenario, if we play Booze, we get a Vigor off of our Boo trigger, and then we can play our Smashback Alehorn to simulate, right, us getting an Agility and a Might token. So in this current situation, we have 3 tokens on board, meaning our Overcrowded is currently a 5 block from Arsenal, and that is definitely pretty nice. That's just from the tokens we ourselves are generating. So if you're against a token-heavy hero, Overcrowded has the potential to be quite the hefty block that is also playable from Arsenal. So yeah, this card is definitely really, really solid. Now, we do also have to squeeze in Rouse the Ancients, right? Because it is technically feasible in Lyath, right? So Rouse the Ancients has an additional cost to play this. You have to reveal a total of 13 power between different cards. And if you do, it gains its own power as well as go again. Now, its own power. Now, since it's gaining power, that means its base is still 0. So it doesn't actually get halved by Lyath's ability. So in this scenario, right, we'd be able to play Rouse the Ancients, pitch a blue, right, in this case 2 steps ahead, and then reveal Thump, Thump, and overturn the results as 2 4s and a 5 in order to trigger Rouse the Ancients, which is now coming in as a nice 7 with Go Again that we could follow up with a Titan's Fist or an Overturn the Results, but most likely a Titan's Fist since they're both swinging for 3 anyway. Now, the last thing to do, of course, is to drop something big as Lyath, because having access to 5 intellect is, well, just great, right? 5 cards is a lot of resources to play around with. So what can we do? Well, we'll throw out some Auras of Suspense. We have Tension in the Air and our Act of Glory, just to round out the pitch basis, if you will. So 6 resources in total. And then we can throw out a 2 steps ahead. Now, we're playing these Auras on our turn because we want to stack them up with our next set of Auras, right? So we want them to stay at the same suspense counters. So we get our next hand, and it's going to be 2 Leave 'em Hangings, right? So a little bit of disruption, slow down what our opponent is doing, while also setting up some more big things. So both of these, along with the 2 previous auras, are all at 2 suspense, meaning that they are on the same timing. So Intimidate, and then of course just pass away. And at the start of our turn, we will get our 2 steps ahead, which gets us 3 might and a confidence, and then our suspense counters will go down to 1. So everything will then trigger on our following turn. So yeah, we have a lot of damage banked up, and we'll just stash our Villainous Pose, and then we have our, well, sort of kill turn, right? It's definitely not enough to OTK. There's probably some stuff you can do with in the palms of your hands, for instance, to get to an OTK amount, but it is still going to be big nonetheless. So we'll pass back through to our turn, and all of our effects are going to resolve. So we get 3 might, right? We get 6 off of Act of Glory, 2 sets of 4 off of Leave 'em Hanging, and another 4 from Tension in the Air, not to mention then the things that we play on our turn. So all these can resolve nice and quickly, and then we can play ourselves a Villainous Pose, pitch a Escalate Violence, leaving 1 resource for our Revolting Gesture, and then we can also tack on a Nimblism for our Bully Tactics, which is a 0-cost card, but has the ability to pay 3 to intimidate away 3 of our opponent's block pieces, right? So 33, stripping 3 cards away from our opponent is pretty nice in terms of a nice big attack, right? But, you know, it's probably just scratching the surface. So I hope you're having as much fun as I am, right, with Super Slam, because there's a lot going on, a lot to explore, and it is just a really, really great time with deck construction at the moment. So yeah, let me know what you think. But I hope you enjoyed. We'll leave it there, and then on to the expansion cards for the next one. See ya.